Of Hollywood's most recognizable bad guys, playing roles in movies and TV.
And he was like 12 or 13, I remember, but
everyone knows Danny Trejo's face, the scars, the tattoos, the villain in over 300 movies. But nobody talks about what he hides behind that image. In 2010, doctors found a tumor on his liver the size of a fist. He told no one. He was terrified Hollywood would stop calling. Then in 2019, he crawled into a flipped car and pulled out a trapped child. The same hands that once committed armed robbery now saved a life. At 80, he still wakes up fighting something most people never see. The reason will shock you. Danny Trejo came into the world on May 16, 1944, in Maywood, California, and from the very start, his life carried a secret that made the adults around him tense. His mother, Dolores, was married to another man who was away fighting in World War II. Yet she became pregnant after meeting Dionisio Trejo at a dance hall in Highland Park in 1943. That truth was not treated like a mistake that could be forgiven. It was treated like a stain. So Danny grew up feeling like proof of betrayal, a child people looked at and remembered what they did not want to talk about. And even the family structure around him made it worse, because his mother already had a daughter, Diane, from her marriage. And then, the fear arrived right on top of the shame. Soon after Danny was born, Dionisio became a wanted man. He had stabbed someone in Los Angeles, and police were searching for him, so the family ran. They went all the way to San Antonio, Texas, hiding out with a baby and a little girl, living like people who had to watch every street corner. They stayed there about a year, and when they returned to Los Angeles, Dionisio turned himself in. For Danny, that meant his earliest years were built on a lesson he never chose, that violence could be normal and running could be necessary. Still, even with all that chaos, a child usually reaches for one safe place. Danny tried to reach for his mother. But when he was 5, in 1949, a small accident became a doorway to something cruel. He sprained his arm while he was with Dolores, and Dionisio used that injury as an excuse to cut her out of Danny's life. It was not a short punishment. It became a long exile. Danny would not see his mother or his sister for 16 years, from 1949 to 1965, which meant he went from kindergarten age to a grown young man without the one person who might have softened his days. So he ended up in a cramped life with his grandmother and cousins, and he learned to take up as little space as possible. Even then, the danger did not fade, because Dionisio was still there, like a storm that could hit whenever it wanted. By the time Danny was 7, in 1951, the violence was so random, it stopped making sense. His father would choke him awake in the morning, even when he had done nothing wrong. Danny tried to explain it to himself the way children do. He told himself maybe he deserved it. Maybe he had been bad, because the idea that adults could hurt you for no reason was too big for a child to hold. And in a house like that, kindness becomes rare and loud in the heart. That is why Alice Mendias, his stepmother, mattered so much. She could not stop the whole machine of abuse, but she offered comfort. And in that home, comfort was almost a miracle. She became the one person who made him feel, even for a moment, like he was not invisible. Those small moments did not erase the fear, but they gave him something to remember later, proof that warmth existed somewhere in the world. Even so, the deeper problem stayed. Danny had been cut off from his mother, bruised by his father, and raised in a family where hardness was praised. So when someone came along who felt like a friend, he grabbed on, even if that friend was leading him into the dark. That person was his Uncle Gilbert, only 6 years older than him, so he felt more like an older brother than an uncle. Gilbert seemed cool. He had money, he had confidence, he had stories. And when Danny was 8, Gilbert introduced him to marijuana, not like a warning, but like a shared secret. To Danny, it felt like belonging. It felt like being chosen by the one person who actually wanted him close. That is how the trap works. It never looks like a trap at first. By the time Danny was 12, the line was already crossed again. He caught Gilbert using heroin and demanded to try it. He even forced the moment by threatening to tell if he was not given some. Gilbert injected him, and Danny overdosed the very first time. Imagine that, a child's body hitting the edge of death before he even turns 13. After that, heroin was hard for a kid to get, so he drank heavily, and he also became useful to Gilbert in the worst way. He started running errands, carrying drug balloons, sitting in parks while money was collected, learning the rhythm of crime while other kids were learning the rhythm of school. Meanwhile, Gilbert also shaped him with violence, calling it training. He taught Danny to box, but it was not gentle practice. It was beatings that forced him to stay on his feet, again and again, until pain felt like a normal language. So Danny became a fighter, not because he loved fighting, but because fighting became the only tool he had. And while this was happening, the rules inside the house stayed tight and cold. Normal things like school dances were treated like shameful acts. Any emotion that looked soft was punished. Anger was allowed. Rage was respected. Everything else was dangerous. So Danny grew up with a body trained for impact and a heart trained to hide. By his teenage years, the danger spilled out of the house and into the streets. What started as fights became robberies. What started as being tough became trying to look unpredictable. Because on the street, the people who survive are not always the strongest. They are often the ones others think are capable of anything. Danny leaned into that image. He used weapons. He robbed liquor stores. He got pulled into gang violence. The crimes were no longer small. They were the kind that make people step back when they hear the story. Then came 1965, when he was 21, and the street life finally slammed into the courtroom. He was arrested for selling what the authorities said was heroin to undercover federal agents, 4 ounces worth, and he would later insist it was sugar. Either way, the conviction landed him in prison, with a 10-year sentence hanging over his head like a weight that never stops pressing. The world he entered was not a place for learning lessons slowly. It was a place where lessons arrive fast. In 1966, he arrived at San Quentin, a prison that sat on the bay and felt like its own harsh country. The rules inside were strict and brutal. People aligned by race. People protected their space. A wrong look could become a fight, and a fight could become a stabbing. Danny did not walk in as an innocent man, and he did not pretend to be. He dealt drugs. He collected debts. He used fear like a currency because fear was the language everyone understood. But something else happened there too. Something that sounds strange until you understand survival. All that brutal boxing from childhood finally had a purpose. Danny became a champion boxer inside prison, winning in lightweight and welterweight divisions, and that status mattered because it gave him a shield. In a place where weakness invites trouble, being known as a fighter keeps people from testing you every day. It did not make prison safe. Nothing makes prison safe, but it made it possible to breathe. And San Quentin still had its own odd moments that almost looked normal from far away. There were organized matches where military boxers were brought in to fight inmate champions. Picture that scene for a second. Soldiers and prisoners trading punches under bright lights while guards watched. It sounds like a movie, but for the men inside it was another way to release pressure that might otherwise explode in the yard. Because the yard was where the real nightmare lived. Danny saw violence up close, the kind that stays with you. He talked about seeing a man walking around coughing blood, reaching for the knife still stuck in his body. He saw stabbings where no one spoke afterward, not because they did not know, but because in prison, silence is a rule that keeps you alive. He lived through a time when prison gangs were growing stronger and more organized, when power structures were forming that would shape California prisons for years. And in the middle of all this, there is one story that shows how strange life can be when you are locked up young. In 1961, before San Quentin, Danny was in Los Angeles County Jail waiting to be transferred. And he met a skinny, broke inmate who could not even afford a belt and used string to hold up his pants. That inmate was Charles Manson. Danny saw him as small, dirty, and weak. The kind of guy who needed protection but had nothing to pay with. And yet, even then, Manson had a skill that made people pause. He claimed he could hypnotize people, make them feel high without drugs. Danny and his cellmates let him try, mostly out of boredom, and Danny later described feeling warmth in his body as Manson talked them through it, like guided imagination turned physical. So they made an arrangement. Manson could do chores and clean, and in return, they would keep an eye out for him. He could not sleep inside their cell, so he slept just outside the door, close enough that everyone understood he was under protection. At the time, it probably felt like nothing more than jail life being jail life. Just another deal, another day. But years later, when Danny heard what Manson became, it hit him like a shock. The same weak man with string on his pants became a name the whole country would fear, tied to murders that shook Hollywood in August 1969, including the killing of pregnant actress Sharon Tate. For Danny, that twist was a reminder that darkness can grow in places you least expect, sometimes quietly, sometimes right beside you. On May 5, 1968, Soledad State Prison in California exploded into chaos during the Cinco de Mayo riot, and Danny Trejo got swallowed right into the middle of it. Fights were breaking out everywhere, men were rushing in every direction, and fear was moving faster than any plan. In that noise, he grabbed a rock because he felt like he had to protect himself. And while he was trying to hit another inmate, a prison guard stepped into the wrong place at the worst time. The rock struck the guard, a lieutenant, in the head. Trejo has always said it was an accident and that the guard was not his target, but he never denied that the rock he threw caused the injury, and that 1 second changed everything around him. A riot was already dangerous, but this turned it into something that could end his life. In the California prison system, hurting a corrections officer was treated like the most serious kind of crime, and it did not matter that the moment was messy and confused. The guard survived, but the situation still jumped straight into death penalty territory. What began as another violent day behind bars suddenly became the moment that could have sent Trejo to the gas chamber. And the thought of that followed him like a shadow that would not leave. Right after the riot, they threw him into solitary confinement, the hole, and they kept him there for 3 months, from May until August 1968. He was only 24, but he already felt like his record was endless. And now the charges were stacked so high he could barely even understand the weight of them. He was facing multiple gas chamber offenses, including attempted murder of a corrections officer, and at the time, that meant the death penalty was real. In a prison filled with thousands of inmates, the authorities wanted to make an example of someone, and Trejo believed he was the one they picked. So each day in that tiny cell felt like it might be the day someone came to tell him his life was over. Solitary was not just punishment. It was designed to crush your mind, because it took away voices, faces, sunlight, and time that made sense. To survive it, Trejo started doing strange things that were not really strange at all when you think about it. He acted out whole movies from memory, playing every role by himself, switching voices, moving around the small space, repeating scenes just to keep his thoughts from eating him alive. He later joked that it kept him from going crazy, and in the same breath admitted it also made him feel crazier, because that is what isolation does to a person. Still, none of it could fully cover the truth sitting in the corner with him. He might die in a gas chamber. That pressure pushed him into desperate promises. In that cell, with nothing left to bargain with, he started talking to God and trying to trade whatever was still inside him for one simple thing: dignity. He promised that if he could just get through it, if he could just be allowed to live, he would spend his life helping others instead of destroying himself. It was not a speech for an audience. It was a deal made in the dark, because the dark was all he had. Then something happened that felt impossible. The attempted murder charges were dropped, not because the system suddenly got kind, but because they could not prove it the way they needed to. Even with thousands of inmates in the facility during the riot, nobody stepped forward to testify against him. No witness was willing to say on record that Trejo was the one who threw the rock that hit the lieutenant. And without that, the case could not hold. To Trejo, it felt like a door opening when there should have been a wall. He took it as God keeping his end of the bargain, and that belief settled into him like a new rule for living. That near-death stretch did not just scare him, it flipped him. He began attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings while still in prison, starting in 1968, and the promise he made became something he carried day after day. When he finally walked out as a free man on August 23, 1969, he did not treat it like a lucky break he could waste. He treated it like a second life that belonged to something bigger than him. He leaned into sobriety, he worked to stay clean, and he started helping other addicts and young people who were walking toward the same cliff he had almost fallen off. What happened at Soledad became his point of clarity. The moment he saw his life as a failure and understood that the only way forward was to change it completely. Years later, that new path led him into a moment that almost feels like a movie scene, except it happened in real life. In 1985, Trejo was working as a drug counselor, steady in recovery, helping people fight addiction through meetings and support, and then, one night, a young man he was counseling called him in panic and said there was a lot of cocaine there. Trejo rushed over to help without asking too many questions, because that is what he did now, and when he arrived, he realized the place was not a party house or a back room. It was a film set. It was the set of Runaway Train, with John Voight and Eric Roberts, and the whole place was packed with people dressed like prisoners, wearing fake tattoos that smeared, acting tough for the camera. Trejo did not have to act tough. His tattoos were real, his prison time was real, and that truth made him stand out the second he stepped into the room. Someone on the crew looked at him and basically thought the same thing everyone thinks when they see him for the first time. This guy looks like the real thing. They asked him if he wanted to be in the movie, and suddenly, the counselor who came to save someone from a bad night was being offered $50 a day to play a convict. The irony was so sharp, it almost made the whole moment feel like a joke, because he had spent years in places like San Quentin for armed robbery, living the exact life the set was trying to pretend. That is when the connection got even stronger, because on that set, he ran into Eddie Bunker, the screenwriter and consultant, who was also an ex-convict and had done time with Trejo back in San Quentin. They recognized each other, and they laughed, because it was ridiculous in the best way. They had been doing that role for free forever, and now Hollywood was offering cash for it. But the real shift came when Bunker remembered something important about Trejo that most people on set would never know. Trejo could box, and he was not just someone who trained a little. He had been a champion in prison. Bunker asked him if he still boxed, and Trejo said he still trained fighters, even though he did not fight anymore, because he did not want to take hits to the head at that age. Bunker saw the opening right away. The production needed someone to train Eric Roberts for boxing scenes, and suddenly Trejo went from $50 a day as an extra to $320 a day as a boxing coach. Trejo's response was pure Trejo, half joke and half truth, because he knew what money meant when you had lived without it. He said he would fight Godzilla for $320 bucks. Then, because his past always pulled at him like a habit, he even asked how badly they wanted the guy beat up, thinking maybe this was not training but something rougher. Yet what happened instead was better than any scheme. The director watched him work, saw how real it looked, and upgraded him again, giving him an on-screen role as Roberts' boxing opponent. Runaway Train went on to become a serious film, the kind people did not expect to hit that hard. It carried the story of two convicts escaping a brutal Alaskan prison and ending up trapped on a runaway train after the conductor dies, and the performances were so strong that both lead actors earned Academy Award nominations in 1986. That success mattered for a lot of reasons, but for Trejo, it mattered in a very specific way. It proved he could step into a different world without losing himself, and it showed the industry that the face they saw in the background was a man they could actually use. From there, the small paid chance became a long road. The extra job turned into more roles, and the roles kept coming until Trejo became one of the most recognizable tough faces in film and television, showing up in story after story, sometimes as a villain, sometimes as a threat, and sometimes as the guy who feels dangerous but oddly honest. Over the years, he built a career with hundreds of credits, and somehow that same man also kept his other promise alive, the one made in a quiet cell by staying involved with recovery work and helping people who were still trapped in the life he escaped. Then came another fight, the kind you cannot punch your way out of. In 2010, Trejo was diagnosed with liver cancer, and he kept it secret from the public and from most people in Hollywood. He was scared that if producers found out, they would stop hiring him, and he was also scared that treatment would change his body in a way that would reveal the truth. When doctors examined him, they found a tumor on his liver that was about 10 centimeters, and that size made the situation feel even more urgent and frightening. Traditional chemotherapy was not the path they took, so he went through a specialized treatment where doctors targeted the tumor directly using radioactive material delivered into the vessels feeding it. It was intense, it was painful, and it lasted months, but he pushed through it while still trying to look normal to the outside world. Even with his tough image, he admitted the fear got to him behind closed doors, and in private, he let the worry spill out, because cancer does not care about your reputation. When the follow-up scans finally showed he was cancer-free, it did not erase the fear completely. It changed him again, just in a quieter way. And later, he talked about being scared of taking too many pills because he did not want to damage the same organ that almost killed him. Beating cancer gave him relief, but it also gave him a permanent kind of caution that stayed with him. In 2019, people saw another side of him in a moment that had nothing to do with acting. On August 7th, in Sylmar, Los Angeles, two cars crashed hard at an intersection, and one vehicle flipped onto its roof. A special needs child was trapped inside, strapped into a car seat and hanging upside down, and the child's grandmother was stuck in the driver's seat. Trejo was driving nearby, saw it happen, pulled over, and ran toward the wreck without waiting for anyone to tell him what to do. He crawled into the overturned vehicle and tried to unbuckle the car seat, but he could not reach it from his angle, so he worked with another bystander who got in from the other side. Together they managed to free the child, and while firefighters handled the grandmother, Trejo focused on the boy. He did not try to be a hero with big words. He tried to be calm, because calm saves people. He kept the boy distracted by talking about superpowers and flexing muscles, turning fear into a little game, and he made sure the child was looking away from the wreck so the scene would not scar him any more than it already had. It was simple, but it was smart, and it showed the counselor side of him that never really left. For all the fame, he also stayed oddly grounded in the way he lived. He did not chase the flashy image people expect from Hollywood, and he kept himself tied to his community and to regular people. He leaned into work that gave others a second chance, and that idea became even more visible when he started building businesses. In March 2016, he opened Trejo's Tacos in Los Angeles, turning his name into something that could employ people, not just entertain them. The business expanded into multiple locations, and then in 2017, he opened Trejo's Coffee and Donuts, giving it playful menu names that nodded to his life and his film roles. Underneath the branding, the deeper point stayed consistent with the deal he made long ago. He deliberately hired ex-inmates and people in recovery because he knew what it felt like to be counted out, and he wanted his success to pull others forward instead of leaving them behind. His personal life had its own storms too, including multiple marriages and divorces, and he never tried to sell his story as clean or perfect. Even money, which people assume must be endless for someone with so many roles, has been complicated by the reality of taxes and business costs. And by the way, life can hit you even after you think you made it. Yet when you connect all the pieces, the riot, the solitary cell, the promise, the counseling, the film set, the cancer, the rescue, and the restaurants, it starts to feel like one long line instead of separate events. It is the same person moving through different rooms. The fear in the prison becomes the courage on the street. The loneliness in the cell becomes the need to help others feel less alone. And the second chance he got when nobody testified becomes the reason he keeps giving second chances back again and again, because he knows exactly what it feels like when life should have ended, but somehow did not.